Hashtag the armor rejected every alien, until one human stepped in, and the galaxy panicked. The ancient armor sat in the center of the Galactic Museum's most sacred hall, untouched for over 3,000 years. Its black surface seemed to drink in light, creating an aura of mystery that drew millions of visitors from across the galaxy. The armor appeared simple at first glance, a basic humanoid suit with smooth curves and no visible joints. But those who looked closer could see the faint pulse of energy running through microscopic channels carved into its surface. Dr. Kithura, the museum's chief archaeologist, stood before the armor with her 4 arms crossed in frustration. Her insectoid features twitched as she reviewed the latest test results on her holographic display. For the past century, she had dedicated her life to understanding this relic from the predecessor civilization, the mysterious race that had vanished eons ago, leaving behind only scattered artifacts and unanswered questions. Another failure, she chittered to her assistant, a blob-like gelatin named Flux. The Vorthan warrior couldn't even make it glow. That makes it 837 attempts across 43 different species. Flux's translucent body rippled with concern. Perhaps we should consider that the armor simply doesn't work anymore. It is incredibly old. Dr. Kithura's compound eyes flashed with determination. No, the energy readings are constant. The armor is active and waiting. We just haven't found the right candidate. The hall around them buzzed with activity as tourists from dozens of worlds pressed against the protective barriers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary armor. According to ancient texts, the predecessors had created this suit for their greatest champion, a being destined to unite the galaxy in times of great darkness. The legend spoke of terrible power contained within the armor, power that could reshape worlds or destroy entire star systems. Every major government in the galaxy had sent their finest warriors to attempt activation. The proud Centauri had sent their psychic knights. The militaristic Korgan Empire had provided their strongest generals. Even the mysterious Void Walkers had emerged from their hidden dimensions to try their luck. All had failed. The armor remained dormant, its surface cold and unresponsive to every touch, every mental probe, every technological interface they had attempted. Some scholars believed it was broken. Others thought it was waiting for a specific genetic pattern. A few radical theorists suggested it might be waiting for the return of the predecessors themselves. Dr. Kithera walked closer to the armor, her footsteps echoing in the vast hall. The protective field shimmered as she approached, automatically adjusting to allow her passage. She had special clearance as the lead researcher, one of only 12 beings in the galaxy authorized to study the artifact directly. Run another energy scan, she instructed Flux. Focus on the neural interface points. Maybe we missed something. As Flux began the scan, Dr. Kethera noticed something odd. The armor's energy patterns were shifting slightly, pulsing in a rhythm she hadn't seen before. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible, but her trained eye caught it immediately. Flux, are you seeing this? Seeing what, Doctor? The resonance frequency has changed. It's almost like it's searching for something. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the museum. Red warning lights flashed as an automated voice announced, "Attention, all visitors. Unknown vessel approaching. Please remain calm and proceed to designated safety areas." Through the massive viewing windows of the hall, they could see a small, primitive-looking spacecraft descending toward the museum's landing pad. The vessel was unlike anything in their databases, crude, boxy, with chemical propulsion systems that belonged to a pre-space civilization. Who would be flying such an ancient ship? Flux wondered aloud. Dr. Kithera's heart began beating faster as she looked at the armor. Its energy output was increasing steadily, the black surface now showing faint lines of silver light. In all her years of study, she had never seen it react to anything. "Give me a reading on that ship," she ordered, her voice tight with excitement and fear. The museum's sensors quickly analyzed the approaching vessel. The results appeared on her display, causing her to stumble backward in shock. The ship's biosignatures showed a species that wasn't in any galactic database, a bipedal race with strange DNA patterns and neural activity unlike anything they had ever encountered. "Impossible," she whispered. "This species isn't registered with the Galactic Council. They shouldn't even know we exist." The ship landed with a thunderous crash on the museum's pad, clearly not designed for such a delicate maneuver. Steam hissed from its engines as a crude airlock cycled open. Through the viewing windows, Dr. Kethera watched as a figure emerged from the ship. It was roughly humanoid, but different from any known species. It stood on two legs, had two arms, and appeared to be covered in some sort of flexible material. The being moved with a strange, confident gait as it approached the museum entrance. Behind Dr. Kethera, the armor's energy output spiked dramatically. Silver lines now covered its entire surface, pulsing in sync with an unknown rhythm. The temperature in the hall began to rise as ancient systems awakened from their long slumber. "Doctor," Flux's voice was barely a whisper. "The armor, it's activating." Museum security forces were already surrounding the unknown visitor, their weapons drawn but not yet fired. The being seemed unconcerned by their presence, continuing its steady approach toward the main entrance. Through the communication systems, they could hear it attempting to speak, but the language was completely unknown. Dr. Kithera's mind raced as she watched the scene unfold. For 3,000 years, the armor had remained dormant. Now, within moments of this strange being's arrival, it was showing more activity than in all recorded history. The correlation was impossible to ignore. "Flux, I need you to analyze the newcomer's biosignature and compare it to the armor's activation patterns." As her assistant worked frantically at the controls, Dr. Kithera approached the armor. The silver lines were now so bright they hurt to look at directly. The surface temperature had increased significantly, and she could feel waves of energy radiating from the ancient metal. The results of Flux's analysis appeared on the main display, and Dr. Kethera felt her world shift. The biosignature of the unknown being matched perfectly with the energy patterns the armor was generating. After millennia of searching, the armor had found its intended user. "Give me a direct line to the Galactic Council," she ordered, her voice shaking. "And seal this hall immediately. Nobody else gets in or out until we understand what's happening." As security barriers slammed down around the exhibit hall, Dr. Kethera realized that everything was about to change. The armor of the predecessors was awakening, and its chosen champion had finally arrived. But this wasn't one of the great warrior races they had expected. This was something entirely new, something that shouldn't have existed according to everything they knew about galactic civilization. The unknown being had reached the museum entrance and was now speaking with the security chief. Dr. Kithera activated the universal translator, hoping to understand what it was saying. The device struggled with the unknown language for several moments before finally producing a rough translation. "My name is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Discovery. We received your museum's tourist broadcast and thought we'd take a look around. Is there a problem?" Earth. Dr. Kethera had never heard of such a world. According to their star charts, there were no inhabited systems in the direction the ship had come from. This being, this human, as it called itself, came from somewhere beyond the edges of known space. And somehow, the most powerful artifact in the galaxy had been waiting for it. The armor's glow intensified further, and Dr. Kithera could hear a low humming sound building in the air around it. Ancient mechanisms were coming online, systems that had lain dormant since before most galactic civilizations had discovered fire. Whatever was about to happen, Dr. Kithera knew it would reshape everything they thought they knew about the galaxy, the predecessors, and the nature of power itself. The armor had made its choice, and there would be no going back. Through the viewing windows, she watched as Captain Chun continued her conversation with museum security, completely unaware that she was about to become the most important being in galactic history. The armor pulsed brighter with each passing second, waiting for its chosen champion to come home Captain Sarah Chun walked through the museum corridors with wide eyes, marveling at the alien architecture around her. The security escort that surrounded her seemed nervous, constantly checking their weapons and muttering in languages her translator couldn't quite catch. She had expected some curiosity about her arrival. Humans were obviously new to this part of the galaxy, but the level of tension seemed excessive for a simple museum visit. "This is quite a place," she said to the lead security officer, a tall, crystalline being whose body refracted light in beautiful patterns. "How long has it been operating?" "Several thousand years, Captain Chun," the officer replied, his translated voice carrying an odd strain. "We're taking you to see Dr. Kithura, our chief archaeologist. She's very eager to meet you." Sarah nodded, though something in the officer's tone made her uneasy. Through the Discovery's long journey to this system, she had studied what little they knew about galactic civilization from intercepted broadcasts. The museum was supposed to be a peaceful cultural center, not a military installation. Yet everywhere she looked, she saw security personnel and defensive systems that seemed far more advanced than anything Earth had encountered. They passed through a series of increasingly secure checkpoints, each one requiring higher clearance levels. Sarah began to wonder if she had somehow wandered into a government facility rather than a tourist destination. The translator in her ear picked up fragments of urgent conversations happening throughout the building, but the words made little sense. Containment protocols, council notification, unprecedented activation. Finally, they reached a massive set of doors marked with symbols her translator couldn't decode. The crystalline officer paused before opening them, turning to face Sarah with what she interpreted as concern. "Captain Chun, what I'm about to show you is the most significant archaeological discovery in galactic history. Please understand that your presence here is causing unusual reactions from the artifact." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the doors opened to reveal a vast hall dominated by a single display in its center. The room was filled with sophisticated monitoring equipment and dozens of scientists from various species, all focused intently on a suit of black armor that seemed to drink in the light around it. What struck Sarah immediately was that the armor was glowing. Silver lines traced intricate patterns across its surface, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. The energy emanating from it was so intense she could feel it from across the room, like standing near a powerful electrical generator. Dr. Kithura rushed toward them, her four arms gesticulating wildly as she spoke in rapid, excited bursts. "Captain Chun, thank the ancient stars you're here. The armor has been activating since the moment your ship entered our system. In 3,000 years, we've never seen anything like this." Sarah stared at the artifact, feeling an odd sensation in the back of her mind, like a distant voice trying to make contact. The armor's design was strangely familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen something similar. It was clearly built for a humanoid figure, but the proportions seemed slightly off for any of the alien species she had encountered so far. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," Sarah said, stepping closer to the display. "What exactly is that thing, and why would my presence affect it?" Dr. Kithura's compound eyes gleamed with scientific fervor as she began her explanation. "This is the armor of the predecessors, created by the most advanced civilization the galaxy has ever known. They vanished millions of years ago, leaving behind only artifacts like this and cryptic messages about a coming darkness." As they approached the protective barrier around the armor, Sarah felt the strange sensation in her mind growing stronger. It wasn't painful, but it was persistent, like someone tapping on the inside of her skull. The armor's glow intensified with each step she took toward it. "According to our translations of predecessor texts," Dr. Kithura continued, "this armor was created for a specific individual, a champion who would appear in the galaxy's darkest hour. For millennia, we believed it was waiting for one of the established galactic races. We've tested representatives from every known species, from the mightiest Korgan warriors to the most psychically gifted Centauri mystics. None of them could even make it respond." Sarah reached the barrier and placed her hand against the energy field. The moment her palm made contact, The entire hall erupted in brilliant silver light. The armor's glow intensified 100-fold, casting star shadows across the room as ancient systems throughout the museum began coming online. Every scientist in the room stared in shock as readings across their instruments spiked beyond their maximum ranges. The armor wasn't just responding to Sarah's presence. It was calling to her, recognition protocols firing after eons of dormancy. "Impossible," whispered Flux, the gelatin researcher whose translucent body was now rippling with agitation. "The energy output is off our scales. It's like the armor is trying to break free from its containment." Dr. Kithera quickly worked at her control panel, analyzing the flood of data streaming from their sensors. "Captain Shun, I need to ask you some questions. What is your species' origin? How long have you been spacefaring? Do you have any knowledge of the predecessors?" Sarah tore her gaze away from the mesmerizing armor, struggling to focus on the archaeologist's questions. The tapping sensation in her mind had become a steady drumbeat, accompanied by images she couldn't quite understand. Vast fleets of ships, burning worlds, and something dark spreading between stars. "We call ourselves humans," she said, her voice slightly strained as she fought to concentrate. "We've only been exploring space for about 200 years. As for predecessors, I've never heard the term before today. Where's your homeworld?" "Doktor Kitarapiresit. We need exact coordinates. Earth is in what we call the Sol system, about 25,000 light-years from here in the direction we call Galactic North. But I don't understand why this matters." The archaeologist's forearms moved frantically over her controls as she input the coordinates Sarah had provided. Her compound eyes widened as the star charts updated, showing Earth's location far beyond the edge of mapped galactic territory. "That's impossible," she muttered. "There are no habitable worlds in that region. Our surveys showed nothing but dead systems and cosmic radiation." Sarah frowned at this statement. "Your surveys? When were they conducted?" "The last comprehensive deep space survey was completed about 50,000 years ago by the predecessor civilization. They mapped every potentially habitable system within 100,000 light-year radius of galactic center." 50,000 years ago, Sarah repeated slowly. "That would have been long before human civilization developed. Earth might have looked very different then." Dr. Kithera's scientific mind raced as she considered the implications. A species that had evolved in a region the predecessors had dismissed as lifeless, now standing before an artifact that had waited eons for their arrival. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the museum again. This time, the warnings were more urgent. "Emergency council session authorized. All department heads report immediately. Unknown energy signatures detected galaxy-wide." Through the hall's massive viewing windows, they could see ships beginning to appear in the system. Not the sleek vessels of museum visitors, but the angular warships of the Galactic Council's rapid response fleets. Within minutes, dozens of military vessels had taken positions around the museum. "Dr. Kithera," came a voice through the communication system. "This is Council Admiral Thorne. We're detecting massive energy emissions from your facility. Report your status immediately." The archaeologist activated her communicator with one of her 4 hands while continuing to monitor the armor's readings with the others. "Admiral, the predecessor armor has activated. We have the individual it was designed for in custody." "Custody?" Sarah interrupted sharply. Nobody said anything about custody. Before Dr. Kethera could respond, the armor's energy output spiked again. This time, the protective barrier around it began to flicker and fail. Ancient mechanisms built into the museum's structure activated, and blast doors began sealing throughout the facility. "The containment field is failing," shouted Flux. "The armor's energy is overloading our systems." Sarah watched in amazement as the black armor began to move for the first time in millennia. Not the movement of a person wearing it, but the movement of the armor itself. It stood up from its display platform, empty and glowing with increasing intensity. "Captain Chun," Dr. Kithra said urgently, "I believe the armor wants you to wear it. But you must understand, According to our research, this artifact contains enough power to destroy star systems. If you put it on, you would become the most dangerous being in the galaxy. Sarah looked at the armor, now standing and facing her directly despite having no visible sensors or eyes. The tapping in her mind had become a clear voice, speaking in a language she somehow understood despite never having heard it before. The darkness returns, asterisk the voice said. Asterisk the cycle nears completion. The Guardian must rise. Asterisk around the hall. Every piece of monitoring equipment was registering energy levels that threatened to overload the museum's power grid. The Council fleet outside was moving into attack positions, their weapons charging as they prepared for unknown threats. Sarah realized she stood at a crossroads that would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the fate of the entire galaxy. The armor was calling to her, offering power beyond imagination. But power always came with a price, and she suspected this price would be higher than anything she could imagine. The choice was hers to make, and she had only moments to decide before the Council fleet took the decision out of her hands entirely. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped toward the armor. The voice in her mind grew stronger with each step, no longer just words, but images and emotions flooding through her consciousness. She saw glimpses of a vast cosmic war, civilizations falling to something that existed in the spaces between stars, and the desperate final act of a dying race to create one last hope. Captain Chun, wait, Dr. Kithera called out, but Sarah was already reaching for the armor. The moment her fingers touched the black surface, everything changed. The museum hall disappeared around her, replaced by a vast space filled with swirling galaxies and ancient stars. She stood face to face with a being of pure energy, its form shifting between different shapes, but somehow conveying immense wisdom and terrible sadness. "You're not what we expected," asterisk the being said, its voice echoing through dimensions. Asterisk, but you are what was needed. The pattern is complete. Asterisk, what pattern? Sarah asked, surprised to find her voice worked in this strange realm. What happened to the predecessors? Images flooded her mind in response. She saw the predecessor civilization at its height, billions of worlds connected by technology that made humanity's greatest achievements look like stone tools. They had mapped the galaxy, tamed black holes, and built structures that spanned entire star systems. "We grew proud," asterisk the being explained. Asterisk, we believed ourselves masters of reality. But there are things that exist beyond reality, in the spaces where mathematics breaks down and physics holds no meaning. We opened doorways we should never have opened. Asterisk Sarah saw the invasion that followed. Not ships or armies, but something worse. Entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, beings of pure entropy that consumed not just matter and energy, but possibility itself. Entire star systems simply stopped existing, erased from reality so completely that even the memory of them faded. We fought with all our power, all our technology, asterisk the being continued. Asterisk, but how do you fight something that can rewrite the laws of existence? How do you destroy entities that exist in 17 dimensions when you can only perceive 4? Asterisk the images showed the predecessors' final desperate gambit. Using the last of their civilization's resources, they had created the armor, not just as a weapon, but as a bridge between realities. It was designed to bond with a being who could think in ways the predecessors never could, someone whose mind worked differently enough to find solutions they had missed. "We searched every species in the galaxy," asterisk the being said. Asterisk, none had the right combination of creativity, adaptability, and raw stubbornness needed to wield our creation. So we seeded the outer rim with genetic markers, hoping that somewhere, somewhen, evolution would produce what we needed. Asterisk, humans, Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. You influenced human evolution. Not influenced. Guided. The potential was already there in your species' ancestors. We simply encouraged certain traits. Your kind's tendency to solve problems through unconventional means. Your refusal to accept that something cannot be done. Your ability to adapt to any situation and find a way to thrive. Sarah felt the weight of cosmic history settling on her shoulders. Humanity hadn't developed in isolation. They were the product of an ancient plan bred to be weapons against an enemy that could destroy reality itself. The enemy stirs again. Asterisk the being warned. Asterisk our sensors detect dimensional fractures opening at the galaxy's edge. The entities are returning, and this time they know to expect resistance. You must choose, daughter of Earth. Accept the armor and become something beyond human, or watch as everything that exists is slowly erased. Asterisk the cosmic space around Sarah began to fade, bringing her back to the museum hall where chaos had erupted. The armor's energy output had overloaded every system in the building. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as Dr. Kethera and her team worked frantically to prevent a complete power failure. Through the viewing windows, Sarah could see the Council fleet had moved into bombardment positions. Admiral Thorne's voice crackled through failing communication systems. Dr. Kethera, you have 30 seconds to contain this situation or we will be forced to take decisive action. Sarah looked at the armor, now floating beside her with its empty helmet facing her directly. The silver lines covering its surface pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, waiting for her final decision. If I put this on, she said to Dr. Kethera, what happens to me? Do I stay human? The archaeologist's forearms were moving desperately over her failing controls as she tried to analyze the armor's energy patterns. Based on our readings, the armor would fundamentally alter your biology. You would become something unprecedented, part human, part predecessor technology, part something else entirely. Something else? The armor isn't just technology, Dr. Kethera explained, her voice tight with scientific fascination and terror. It's partially composed of matter that shouldn't exist in our dimension. Wearing it would make you a bridge between realities. Sarah closed her eyes and thought of Earth, of the billions of humans who had no idea their fate was being decided in a museum halfway across the galaxy. She thought of her crew aboard the Discovery, waiting for her return. She thought of humanity's dreams of joining the galactic community as equals, not as weapons in an ancient war. 20 seconds, Dr. Kethera. Admiral Thorne's voice was cold with military precision. Power down the artifact immediately, or we open fire. The voice of the predecessor being whispered in Sarah's mind one last time. Asterisk the choice is yours, but know that time grows short. The dimensional fractures are widening. Soon, nowhere in the galaxy will be safe. Asterisk Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the armor. Its surface had shifted, opening like a flower to reveal an interior that seemed to contain infinite depth. She could see networks of energy that would integrate with her nervous system, technological systems that would enhance every aspect of her being, and something else, something that would connect her to the fundamental forces of reality itself. I'm sorry, she whispered to Dr. Kethera. I'm sorry for what happens next. Before anyone could stop her, Sarah stepped into the armor. The moment it closed around her, the museum's emergency lighting failed completely. In the darkness, only the armor's silver glow remained, growing brighter as ancient systems bonded with human biology. The sensation was indescribable. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of her skull, touching systems throughout the museum, reaching out to the Council fleet, sensing the dimensional fabric of space itself. She was still Sarah Chun, but she was also something immeasurably more. Power flowed through her unlike anything she had ever imagined. She could feel the energy patterns of every being in the museum, sense the quantum fluctuations in the space between atoms, perceive the mathematical structures underlying reality itself. When the armor's transformation was complete, emergency lighting flickered back on to reveal Sarah standing in the center of the hall. The armor had changed, flowing like liquid metal to perfectly fit her form. The black surface now showed not just silver lines, but patterns of every color that had ever existed, and some that shouldn't be possible. Dr. Kithera stared at her with a mixture of awe and terror. Captain Chun, are you still you? Sarah turned toward the archaeologist, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate from multiple dimensions simultaneously. I'm Sarah Chen, but I'm also the Guardian, the last shield, the weapon of final hope. I remember things that happened before time began, and I can see futures that may never come to pass. Through the viewing windows, they could see the Council fleet's weapons charging to full power. Admiral Thorne's final warning came through the communication system. Unknown entity, you have violated several galactic treaties. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. Sarah looked up at the fleet with eyes that now burned with inner fire. She could see every ship, every weapon, every weakness in their formation. More importantly, she could perceive something they couldn't, the dimensional fractures opening at the galaxy's edge and the ancient enemy beginning to seep through. Dr. Kithera, she said, her enhanced voice carrying absolute certainty. You need to contact every government in the galaxy. Tell them the predecessor war has begun again, and this time, we're going to win. The armor's power flowed through Sarah as she prepared to face the Council fleet. Knowing that this confrontation was only the beginning of a war that would determine whether reality itself would survive the coming storm, Sarah rose into the air without any visible means of propulsion, the armor's power allowing her to manipulate local gravitational fields. Through the museum's reinforced walls, she could sense the Council fleet's weapons reaching full charge. Admiral Thorne was preparing to fire, seeing her as a threat that needed immediate elimination. With her enhanced perception, Sarah could see the mathematical structures underlying the fleet's formation, predict the trajectory of every shot they would fire, and calculate 17 different ways to disable their ships without causing casualties. But demonstrations of power weren't what the galaxy needed right now. She needed to show them the real threat. Instead of confronting the fleet directly, Sarah extended her consciousness outward, touching the quantum foam at the edge of the galaxy. The armor's sensors, far more sophisticated than anything the current galactic civilizations possessed, detected the dimensional fractures immediately. Dr. Kithera, Sarah said, her voice now carrying across multiple communication frequencies simultaneously. Patch me through to Admiral Thorne. He needs to see what's coming. The archaeologist's hands shook as she worked her controls. Captain, Guardian, the communication array is overloaded. The energy you're emitting is interfering with our systems. Sarah focused her will, and the armor's power dampened to levels that wouldn't disrupt the museum's equipment. She was learning to control abilities that defied physics as she understood it, channeling forces that operated according to laws the predecessors had discovered in their final desperate years. This is Admiral Thorne of the Galactic Council Defense Fleet, came the voice through the speakers. You have 30 seconds to explain your actions before we consider you a hostile entity. Admiral, Sarah replied, her voice carrying a calm authority that surprised even her. I need you to redirect your sensors to coordinates. She transmitted the exact location of the dimensional fractures, information flowing directly from the armor's systems into the fleet's computers. Deep scan, maximum resolution. Look for quantum instabilities in space-time. There was a pause as the fleet's science officers worked to comply with her request. Sarah used the time to fully integrate with the armor's consciousness, learning to navigate the vast database of predecessor knowledge now accessible to her mind. What she found terrified her. The entities that had destroyed the predecessors weren't just powerful. They were the antithesis of existence itself. Where normal matter was composed of particles with mass and energy, these beings were constructed from antiparticles that existed in negative space. They could unmake reality simply by touching it, erasing not just objects and energy, but the very concept that those things had ever existed. Guardian, Admiral Thorne's voice had taken on a note of confusion. Our sensors are detecting massive spatial distortions at the coordinates you provided. The readings don't match anything in our databases. That's because your databases don't include information about entities that exist in 17 dimensions, Sarah replied. Admiral, you need to evacuate every world within 50 light years of those fractures. The enemy that destroyed the predecessors is returning. Through her enhanced senses, Sarah could feel the galaxy's communication networks lighting up as word of the crisis spread. Council representatives from dozens of worlds were demanding explanations. Military commanders were arguing about jurisdiction, and civilian populations were beginning to panic as news of an unknown threat reached them. But Sarah could also sense something else. The dimensional fractures were widening faster than the predecessor records had indicated. The enemy had learned from their previous invasion, adapting their approach to overcome the defenses that had delayed them before. Dr. Kithara, Sarah said, turning back to the archaeologist, I need access to every predecessor artifact in the galaxy. The armor is powerful, but it was never meant to fight this war alone. The doctor's compound eyes reflected her growing understanding of the situation. There are hundreds of artifacts scattered across museum collections and private holdings. Most governments consider them too dangerous to study extensively. They were right to be cautious, Sarah agreed. Predecessor technology can reshape reality. But right now, that's exactly what we need. Through the communication systems, Admiral Thorne was coordinating an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Sarah listened to the rapid exchanges between military leaders, scientists, and politicians as they tried to understand the scope of the threat they were facing. All available fleets are converging on the fracture zone, the Admiral reported. But, Guardian, our weapons are designed to fight conventional enemies. If these entities can manipulate dimensional space, your conventional weapons will be useless, Sarah confirmed. But I have a plan. The predecessors didn't just create this armor. They built an entire network of defensive installations throughout the galaxy, hidden and waiting for activation. With the armor as a command interface, I can bring them online. She extended her consciousness again, this time searching for the quantum signatures of dormant predecessor technology. What she found exceeded her expectations. Hidden bases in asteroid fields, weapon platforms disguised as natural phenomena, and massive generators buried in the cores of uninhabited worlds, an entire shadow infrastructure waiting for someone with the authorization to activate it. But as Sarah began the process of awakening these systems, she realized the terrible cost the predecessors had built into their final plan. Each installation required a massive energy source to function, and that energy had to come from somewhere. It would come from her. The armor wasn't just a weapon or a tool. It was designed to channel the life force of its wearer into the Galactic Defense Network. The predecessors had created the ultimate sacrifice, a system that would give one being the power to save the galaxy at the cost of their own existence. Sarah, Dr. Kitharis said quietly, having somehow sensed the gravity of what she was discovering, what aren't you telling us? Sarah looked at the archaeologist, then at the scientists and security personnel who had gathered in the hall. These beings had dedicated their lives to understanding the past, never realizing they were living in the shadow of an ancient tragedy that was about to repeat itself. The predecessor defense network can stop the entities, she said finally, but activating it will require more energy than any single star can provide. The armor will have to convert matter directly into power, starting with. She didn't finish the sentence, but Dr. Kithara's scientific mind quickly worked through the implications. Starting with the person wearing it. Sarah nodded. The armor will sustain me long enough to coordinate the galaxy's defense and activate the major installations. But once the network is fully online, the energy requirements will exceed what's sustainable. The Guardian is designed to be a temporary solution. Through the museum's communication systems, they could hear Admiral Thorne coordinating the largest military mobilization in galactic history. Every spacefaring civilization was contributing ships and personnel to the defense effort, but Sarah knew conventional military tactics would only buy them time. How long? Dr. Kithara asked quietly. Sarah consulted the armor's projections. calculating energy expenditure rates against the time needed to activate defensive installations across the galaxy. If I start the activation sequence now, maybe 72 hours before the drain becomes irreversible. 72 hours to save the galaxy and say goodbye to everything she had ever known. Sarah thought of her crew aboard the Discovery, of Earth and all the world she would never see, of the life she was about to sacrifice for beings she had met only hours ago. But she also thought of the images the predecessor consciousness had shown her. Entire civilizations simply ceasing to exist, reality itself unraveling as the entities spread their influence. If she didn't act, there would be no future for anyone. Guardian, Admiral Thorne's voice crackled through the communication system. Long-range sensors are detecting movement within the fractures. Multiple contacts, size, and composition unknown. They're heading for the nearest inhabited system. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders. The choice was no longer whether to activate the defense network. It was whether the galaxy would have any defenders left when the real battle began. Dr. Kithra, she said, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had accepted an inevitable fate, document everything. When this is over, when the galaxy is safe, they'll need to understand what the predecessors built and why. They'll need to be ready for the next time. Next time, the archaeologist asked. The entities exist outside normal space-time, Sarah explained, beginning to rise toward the museum's upper levels. They've been trying to invade our reality for billions of years. The predecessors stopped them once. I'll stop them this time. But someday, somewhere, they'll try again. And when they do, Sarah looked back at the gathered scientists one last time, memorizing their faces and the determined hope she saw in their alien features. When they do, the galaxy will be ready. Because this time, we'll know what we're fighting for. The armor's power flowed through her as she prepared to begin the most important 72 hours in galactic history. And the last 72 hours of her life, Sarah phased through the museum's walls, the armor allowing her to exist partially outside normal space. Below her, the Council fleet maintained their defensive positions, while above, the first stars were beginning to flicker as the entities emerged from the dimensional fractures. She extended her consciousness across the galaxy, feeling for the dormant predecessor installations. Each one responded to her presence, ancient systems coming online for the first time in millennia. But with each activation, she felt the armor drawing more deeply from her life force. The first installation to fully activate was a massive weapon platform hidden inside what everyone believed was a natural asteroid belt. As Sarah's commands reached it, the rocks split apart to reveal a structure larger than most space stations, bristling with weapons that operated on principles current science couldn't explain. Guardian, Admiral Thorne's voice reached her through quantum communication channels. We're registering massive energy signatures throughout the galaxy. Are these your doing? Predecessor defense installations coming online, Sarah replied, simultaneously activating 17 more platforms across 3 spiral arms. Admiral, I need you to coordinate evacuation efforts for systems near dimensional fractures. These installations can contain the entities, but any civilian populations in the area won't survive the energy discharge. Through her enhanced senses, Sarah watched as the first entity emerged fully from the fractures. It was impossible to look at directly. Her mind couldn't process something that existed in so many dimensions simultaneously. Where it moved, space itself became unstable, stars flickering as their nuclear processes were disrupted by proximity to something that shouldn't exist. The entity reached the first inhabited system in its path, a mining colony with 12 million residents. Sarah felt their terror as space around their world began to warp, gravity wells forming and collapsing randomly as reality struggled to accommodate the invader. She activated the nearest predecessor installation, a planet-sized generator buried in the system's outer asteroid belt. The weapon fired a beam of pure mathematics. Not energy or matter, but formulaic structures that could rewrite the laws of physics in a localized area. Where the beam struck the entity, dimensions collapsed back into normal space, forcing the invader to exist according to rules it couldn't ignore. The entity screamed across 17 dimensions simultaneously. The sound was picked up by every sensor in the galaxy, a harmonious discordance that spoke of frustrated rage and ancient hunger. But it was wounded now, forced into a form that could be fought with conventional physics. Sarah felt the armor's energy drain accelerate as she brought more installations online. Each weapon platform, each defensive system, each reality anchor required power that had to come from somewhere. The armor was converting her cellular structure directly into usable energy, sustaining her consciousness while slowly consuming the matter that composed her body. Guardian, Dr. Kithura's voice reached her through the communication network. Our readings show you're burning through mass at an exponential rate. At this consumption level, I know, Sarah interrupted, simultaneously coordinating attacks against 3 more entities while activating defense networks around critical population centers. I've got maybe 40 hours left before the conversion process becomes irreversible. But 40 hours might not be enough. More entities were emerging from the fractures, dozens of them spreading across the galaxy like a tide of anti-existence. Each one required focused attention to contain, and the predecessor installations, while powerful, had been dormant for so long that many were operating at reduced efficiency. Sarah made a decision that would have been impossible for her human mind to calculate, but was obvious to her enhanced consciousness. Instead of trying to fight each entity individually, she would lure them all to one location and activate the predecessor's ultimate weapon, the reality anchor buried in the galaxy's central black hole. The process would require every remaining moment of her existence and would fundamentally alter the structure of local space-time, but it was the only way to ensure the entities could never return. She began broadcasting a signal that existed across multiple dimensions, something the entities couldn't ignore, a beacon that resonated with their fundamental nature. One by one, they turned from their paths of destruction and began converging on her location. Guardian, what are you doing? Admiral Thorne demanded as his sensors showed dozens of entities changing course. You're drawing them directly toward the most populated region of the galaxy. Trust me, Admiral, Sarah replied, feeling her molecular structure continuing to break down as she channeled more power than any single being was meant to handle. I need them all in one place for this to work. Through the communication networks, she could hear the panic spreading across galactic civilization. Entire worlds were evacuating, space lanes clogged with refugee ships fleeing the approaching entities. Military forces from every species were converging on the galactic core, preparing for a battle they couldn't hope to win with conventional weapons. But Sarah wasn't planning a conventional battle. As the entities gathered around her position, she began the final phase of the predecessor plan. The reality anchor was a device that could stabilize space-time itself, creating a zone where only 3 dimensions could exist and where the normal laws of physics were absolutely enforced. Activating it would require her to become a living conduit for forces that operated beyond the fundamental constants of the universe. The armor had been designed for this purpose, but the energy requirements would consume not just her physical form, but her consciousness itself. Dr. Kithura, Sarah said, her voice beginning to carry strange harmonics as the armor's transformation accelerated. I need you to record a message. For Earth. For humanity. The archaeologist's voice was thick with emotion as she replied, Of course, Guardian. What do you want them to know? Sarah looked out at the entities surrounding her, beings of pure destruction that had haunted the galaxy for millions of years. In moments, she would activate the reality anchor and end their threat forever. But she would also be ending the brief, bright spark of consciousness that was Sarah Chun of Earth. Tell them that when they reached the stars, when they joined the galactic community as they always dreamed, tell them why there was a place waiting for them. Tell them that humanity was never meant to be conquerors or subjects. We were meant to be guardians. The entities were closing in now, sensing the massive energy buildup as Sarah prepared to activate the reality anchor. Their presence warped space around them, creating gravitational anomalies and temporal distortions that threatened to tear apart nearby star systems. Tell them, Sarah continued, feeling her consciousness beginning to fragment as the armor converted the last of her neural tissue into pure energy, that the galaxy is worth protecting. That even strangers become family when you're willing to fight for each other. She reached out with the armor's power and grasped the reality anchor buried in the galaxy's central black hole. The device responded to her touch, systems that had waited eons for activation finally coming online. The effect was immediate and devastating. Space-time crystallized around Sarah's position, creating a zone where only 3 dimensions could exist. The entities suddenly, forced into forms their consciousness couldn't handle, began to collapse in on themselves. But the reality anchor required constant input to maintain its effect. Sarah felt the armor drawing on the last reserves of her existence, converting memory and thought and dream into the energy needed to keep the dimensional lock stable. Guardian, Admiral Thorne's voice seemed to come from very far away. Energy readings are off our scales. What's happening? Sarah tried to respond, but found that language was becoming difficult. The concepts that made up her human identity were being converted into mathematical structures needed to maintain the reality anchor. She was becoming something beyond individual consciousness, a living equation that enforced the laws of physics in an area of space that had forgotten how to follow rules. Through failing sensors, she watched as the last of the entities collapsed into 3-dimensional space and simply ceased to exist. Without access to higher dimensions, they couldn't maintain coherence. They dissolved like nightmares exposed to daylight, leaving behind only empty space and the echo of their destruction. The galaxy was safe. The reality anchor stabilized, its effect now self-sustaining as it fed off the energy of the central black hole. The dimensional fractures sealed themselves, space-time healing like a wound closing. The nightmare that had haunted galactic civilization since before recorded history was finally over. But Sarah Chun was gone. In her place, something both more and less than human maintained a final connection to the communication networks. Not consciousness as biological beings understood it, but a pattern of information that had once been a starship captain from a small blue world. Dr. Kithara, the pattern said, its voice carrying harmonics from folded dimensions. Take care of them. All of them. That's what guardians do. The communication faded as the last traces of individual identity dissolved into the mathematical structures maintaining galactic stability. Where Sarah Chun had been, only the armor remained, floating in space as a monument to the sacrifice that had saved everything. Admiral Thorne's fleet found the armor 3 hours later, its surface dark and cold, showing no signs of the incredible power it had channeled. They brought it back to the museum, where Dr. Kithara placed it in a place of honor, surrounded by recordings of Sarah's final message and detailed accounts of humanity's role in the galaxy's salvation. Word spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Humanity, the strange species from beyond mapped space, had produced the guardian the galaxy needed. Their representative had willingly sacrificed herself to end a threat that had existed since before most civilizations had developed writing. When the first official contact teams reached Earth 6 months later, they found a species preparing for their first tentative steps into interstellar space. The revelation that one of their own had already saved the galaxy changed everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. But perhaps more importantly, it changed how the galaxy viewed humanity. These beings from the outer rim weren't potential conquerors or subjects to be absorbed into existing power structures. They were guardians, protectors who would sacrifice everything to defend others. Earth was offered immediate membership in the Galactic Council, with full voting rights and access to advanced technologies. Humanity accepted, but on the condition that they be allowed to establish the Guardian Corps, an organization dedicated to protecting the galaxy from threats that conventional military forces couldn't handle. The first Guardian Corps facility was built around the museum where Sarah-Chun had made her choice. Every recruit who joined the organization walked through that hall, past the empty armor that had once held their predecessor, and swore the same oath. We are the guardians of the galaxy, protectors of all who call the stars home. We stand watch against the darkness, not for glory or power, but because everyone deserves to dream of tomorrow. And in the mathematical structures that maintain the reality anchor at the galaxy's heart, something that had once been a starship captain smile with dimensions that no longer quite existed, knowing that the watch would continue, and that the galaxy was in good hands.